We're going to talk about the lessons we've learned fighting childhood obesity. This presentation was supposed to be done by a guy named Louie, who started an organization called Louie's Kids. His mom has some health issues today, so I'm pinch hitting. I've been a board member since the start, and I've been the treasurer of the organization. I don't have the command of the statistics that Louie has, but I think you guys all know the grim statistics of childhood obesity anyway, so we'll just skip that and tell a little bit of the story of how this organization started and what we've sort of learned along the way. It started with Louis's dad. Everybody affectionately knew him as Big Louie. He had a stroke, and that's when we first learned how completely unsuited the healthcare system was to really large people. One of the things you're supposed to do immediately when you get a stroke is find out what kind it is. And there's two kinds, and if you treat it wrong, you can cause another stroke. So they normally just put you in a CAT scan machine, and then they determine it immediately and then begin treatment. But there was no CAT scan machine that would support someone his size in Virginia, Maryland, or the District of Columbia. So they were never able to diagnose what kind of stroke it was, so he never really got very good treatment. He was in 6 different hospitals and rehab centers, I think, over a period of 6 months before he had his second stroke and passed. It paralyzed a hospital for him to need anything. You know, to move him around so that he doesn't get bed sores or to change the bed really took 6 people. You know, they had to find every strong orderly on the floor and have them stop at once and synchronize everything they're doing. But now, at the time, he was the only person of his size in any one of these facilities. But now at any given time in a medium-sized hospital, there's 6 or 7 people his size. So they're learning to adapt, but it's a very expensive proposition to help a paralyzed 550-pound man. So after Louis's dad had passed, he decided he wanted to do something to help kids not go down the same road, and so he started Louie's Kids. They identified some weight loss summer camps that had some outstanding programs where you'd go for a month and you'd live at a summer camp and you'd learn nutrition and exercise, and most of these kids would lose a pretty good amount of weight. And it worked really well. It takes that long to immerse kids in new behavior and new patterns. So having them spend a month is a really good thing. Unfortunately, you can't solve the problem up to scale, you know, at the cost of $5,000 a kid per month. You know, at that rate, you'll bankrupt the whole country before you'll solve the problem of childhood obesity. So we started to look at trying to find some much more cost-effective solution. They loved it up there, like in the mountains of North Carolina. They experienced things they would never experience in their communities at home. They tried new sports, they tried new activities, and so we decided to try to replicate it in an after-school program setting. And so we would put kids through a 16-week, 4-day-a-week after-school program, and that works pretty well too. The kids, a lot of these kids just don't get any physical activity at all. So this was a place where they learned, you know, how to move. A lot of these kids know nothing good about nutrition. They know all the wrong things. They see lean, healthy athletes drink sports drinks, and then they think, well, maybe if I drink one of these, it'll make me healthier. And if one doesn't work, maybe I'll try 10. So they think Gatorade is, you know, nutritious. And so we have to teach them all these things. 16 weeks is a pretty good amount of time to spend with kids and to try to change their patterns. And we've had a lot of success with that. There's a catch, though. Well, here's what this after-school program involves. We do the nutrition education, including with parents. If the parent won't participate, the kid isn't allowed to participate. They start with some seminars on proper nutrition. We work with Piggly Wiggly of South Carolina to do grocery store tours, because the first thing the parents say is, well, all that healthy food's too expensive. So we have their dietitian at Piggly Wiggly take them on a tour of the store and show them how to shop affordably and healthy. We teach them fun exercise. We try to expose them to almost everything once at least, so that every kid will come away saying, wow, I didn't know I liked Tae Bo, because of course they had never been exposed to Tae Bo before. The girls, of course, love, you know, hip hop dance, and you know, the boys tend to like the kickboxing and things like that. We try to expose them to high intensity interval training, because you know, one of the things you start realizing about these kids is that they're not obese because they just eat too many cheeseburgers. Their metabolisms are wrecked. there's no proper hormonal signaling in their body. They don't eat to satiety because they just don't get those signals anymore. They eat until their stomach is full, and then some. And they're eating all these really high inflammatory foods. So if you did blood work on them, all of their inflammatory markers would be completely off the charts. So it's just not a matter of calories with them. You've got to teach them new ways of eating food that's different, not just less. And the hormonal response to exercise is even more important than just the sheer calories that are burned. So we try to get them involved in high intensity exercise, but we have to realize that these really large kids, you can't have them just go sprint because they'll tear their hamstrings out in the first 2 minutes. So things like Taibo work really well. Medicine balls are probably some things that would work with these kids. It's sort of a sprint thing, but it's a safe move that is real high intensity, but it's not damaging, and it's not going to hurt their joints and their ligaments and whatnot. And let's stipulate, the kids we're talking about aren't, they're not just 2 dress sizes above their prom dress. Some of our kids are 300, 400, 500 pounds. So this isn't just kids who are a little chubby until they have their growth spurt. These are morbidly obese kids in an adolescent body. I think the largest of our kids so far was we'll talk about him later. The largest current kid involved is a young lady named Davida, and last week she weighed in at 457 pounds, and she thought she was doing pretty good. These are really large kids. So some of the lessons that we've learned probably don't apply to just the average overweight, middle school kid. And these are kind of special circumstances where you just can't treat them the same way. Try to expose them to fun exercise, and then these kids go through therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, to try to change behaviors. Their behaviors around food is a big part of the problem. And so this is like the same sort of therapy. There's a clinical psychologist in the room with them, for hour-long sessions of group therapy, and that helps them an awful lot with self-esteem and some other issues. And as we'll talk about, these kids didn't get fat just because they overate a little bit. There was some problem there that needs a little digging at. One of our principals is a big fan. Once these kids get a little bit of success going, they completely change. Just if in the first couple of weeks of one of these programs they see visible difference, that they lost a meaningful amount of weight that they can see, it's like a light comes on inside of them. That they don't have to feel helpless and hopeless anymore, that they kind of feel like they're more in control, and so it affects their grades, it affects their interaction with their friends, it affects how they are at home. So it's not just, if we only move the needle on their health, that would be really good. But if all these other things, are kind of a plus as well. Of course, having a, absolutely awesome principal involved as a cheerleader for us at that particular school was great. That was where we did our first Fit Club. And he's been a big advocate because he just saw some kids that, like a complete 180 in their behavior and their interest in school after just a little bit of exercise and some food education. Just some stats. You can change these kids' lives if you just change, their diet and their exercise patterns a little bit. 139 kids. Lewis knows all of their names and is still on first name basis with most of their moms and keeps in touch with them. We try to arrange an aftercare program. After the 16 weeks is up, we don't just cut them loose. We'll try to get them like a discounted Y membership, or maybe we'll just pick up the tab altogether so that they continue to do these things. We don't want to, changing a kid that's that big is not an event, it's a process. And we want to try to set them up to succeed once the program's over. Okay, so the downside is that for it to work in a cost-effective basis, you really have to have a perfect set of facts. The kid has to be into it. You can't drag the kid into the program and expect him that he or she's just going to embrace it and do what they're told. They have to really be highly motivated. The administration and the school nurses and whatnot have to be highly motivated too to try this and to help us get to the families. The school nurses are really key with a lot of these families. They're the healthcare system that a lot of these families are exposed to. So having them embrace it helps us get the right kids. And then the parents have to be willing to change too. because most of these kids don't have the ability to go food shopping on their own and make the right choices. They're at the mercy of whatever the parents stock the house with, and if the parents won't change, nothing's going to change. If they're not willing to put the right fuel in these kids' bodies, then we can tell them the right lessons and they can apply them some other time in their life, but now, right at this moment, nothing's going to really happen if they go home to a household that's just filled with high fructose corn syrup. I mean, you just can't expect the kid never to touch it. It doesn't really work that way. So even in a fairly large school, it's hard to find 20 to 25 kids who all of those criteria match up. And that's where it's cost effective for us to put on a program, is with 20 or 25 kids. If 2 weeks into this thing, half of them have dropped out, the numbers of just how much we're spending per kid don't add up so well. Yeah, that's DaVita. Some just need lots and lots of one-on-one attention. She wants to be an athlete someday. I mean, but boy, it's a lot to change. And they get discouraged like adults do. They don't know what the right answers are, like most adults don't. I mean, weight loss is hard for adults to figure out, and I don't know why we think kids are going to figure it out on their own. But so beyond the group programs, we'll continue to support DaVita with a counselor every once in a while, and make sure her gym membership is paid up, and every once in a while drop off a bag of groceries or something to her household. And her parents aren't the most supportive, but we try to keep in touch with these people and keep giving them hope that they can make these changes on their own. But we think more one-on-one attention is probably going to be the way to go, and on a much more cost-effective basis. These kids are much more digitally savvy than any of the grown-ups involved in this thing are, so they're teaching us about Skyping. We're all now using Fitbits. I don't know if you guys are probably aware of these things, and kids think that anything you can hook up to a computer is cool, so this is like a digital pedometer, but you plug it into your computer and then it tracks how many steps and stairs you take each day, and then sends you little encouraging emails saying, yeah, you hit 10,000 steps. And that's all great for these kids. We have a therapist who answers the Doc Rachel questions, and then she does live chats with them every once in a while, so kids can log on from wherever they are and into like a virtual therapy session. We're going to work with Piggly Wiggly to do the grocery store tour on video, so that's available department by department on our website, so that we can sort of push that resource out there and really teach people that you can eat the right stuff and have it not be super expensive. The expensive stuff is in the middle of the store where all the boxed products are that are bad for you, and it's the healthy stuff on the outside of the store that's actually pretty darn affordable. And we want to work with the church community is a place where we think we can make a difference, probably, because that's a very supportive environment for a lot of families, and that's where communities come together, and if we can change sort of like one community at a time, that'll be pretty nice as well. Okay, so some things we learned. You can't do this without the parent signing up completely and embracing this even more than the kid does. They've got to be willing to change what they buy and change how they cook and change the behavior around the home to encourage more physical activity, to encourage exercise. And if they're not bought in, you can try really hard, but you're probably not going to make a huge difference with the kid. DaVita, the second point, that a lot of these even morbidly obese kids don't understand that there's a problem. Their parents are heavy, their grandparents were heavy, they were big. DaVita thought she's just a little chubby, and then she was stunned when she steps on a scale and the first number's a 4. And that's just what she thought was going to be normal. And maybe she doesn't even realize that she's so much bigger than everyone else she's around. I don't know what's inside her head, but teaching these kids that this isn't normal, and you don't have to feel bad about yourself, but you just have to want to change it. It's pretty motivating when you start to explain to these kids that, do you really want to have hip replacement surgery when you're in your 20s? I mean, you're in for a lot of pain if you don't sort of change some of these fundamental things. One of the saddest things we learned is that these morbidly obese kids oftentimes it's the result of some trauma in their life. And they didn't just slowly get heavy. Something bad happened, and then it changed their relationship with food. So like the death of a parent or grandparent, families breaking up, going into foster care, a lot of sexual abuse is involved. One of the girls that we work with was raped by her grandfather and uncle, and she decided she wanted to eat so much that no one would ever do that again. So that's a lot of hardwired stuff you got to get in there and dig around with and try to change. And they need somebody to talk to. So, getting some help here is a good thing, but that'll change. That person wants to be ugly because of something terrible that happened, and it's tough cases. Kids are very nature deficient. At least these kids are. They never get outside. They don't like to get sweaty. They're not normal quote marks kids, in the sense of like when we were growing up, we tried to get out of the house as early as we possibly can, and came back only when the street lights came on, and we ran around. And these kids are not. They never get outside, and partly it's because of the neighborhoods they live in, and it's not safe to just necessarily go do that by yourself. And it's kind of the times that we're in, are different. But you got to break that. You got to get them to think that getting sweaty is a good thing, not just kind of icky. These kids have no play skills. They've never been picked for the teams. They don't know how to throw. So now not only do they not generally want to be outside doing stuff, but when they are, they're self-conscious because they just don't have physical skills. Their movement patterns are terrible. If you were to ask them to bear crawl across the room, they probably couldn't synchronize it. To just basic human movement patterns don't work. So we have to reteach them some of those things that they've kind of lost. Yeah, we can't just like run them around. Okay, we're going to go out in the track and we're going to run around in circles for a while. They really have to change the behaviors and the choices they make. Journaling works. If we can get kids to journal what they're eating and what their activity levels are and be really conscious of it, to wear a pedometer every day and write down how many steps you took, just that attention to it and writing things down seems to really work with these kids. The compliance level is about what you would expect with getting any teenager to comply with almost anything, but if the kids do it, it really makes a difference. It almost doubles the effectiveness of everything we're doing if we can convince them to journal. One thing that we did learn is we started with equipping every kid with a Calorie King guide, one of those big books that tells you the macronutrients and calories and almost anything you can eat. And then they would journal their food, and at the end of the day, they were supposed to sit down and do the math. That's not going to happen. A lot of these kids don't have math skills, frankly, and trying to get them to understand the difference between grams of protein and grams of fiber, and it was just way too advanced for a middle school audience. So getting them to just write down what they ate made them sensitive to what they ate, but trying to go to the next step of having them understanding the nutritional impact of each food was a bridge too far. Maybe if we had more time, or maybe older kids, but we weren't able to get people to put it into a food log and then really figure out the nuts and berries of what they were eating. And then one of the things Lewis talks about the most is, one thing that's gone horribly wrong, especially in a lot of these kids' families, is that there is no family dinner table where they sit down and have a meal together. And that's just completely absent from their lives. And if we can change that, that makes a huge difference, where you sit down and you enjoy the food together, and it's planned. It's not just this impromptu, grab whatever's in the fridge. If we can get families back at the dinner table, that makes a huge difference here. Okay, then we have to have some controversy, because no presentation is good without some. One of the things we're starting to talk about quite a bit is that we think the food stamp program is part of the problem. And we think the food stamp program should look a lot more like WIC, where there's a very restricted list of foods that you can buy with other people's money. And if the larger community is going to provide nutrition for your family, maybe it should actually be nutritious. It doesn't have to be quite as strict as WIC, but if you're buying ho-hos with food stamps, you're doing it wrong. And WIC is designed to make sure that basic nutrition of meats and fish and fruits and vegetables and grains are available, but only up until the time the kid turns 1. Then when the kid turns 1, we stop caring what they're eating. And there's 43 million Americans on the SNAP program. They can buy almost anything they want except for cigarettes and beer. And of course, I'm almost like on the libertarian side of the world, but I don't want to boss anybody around. But we do think that if you're buying it with your own money, to buy whatever you want, but if it's the taxpayers' money, maybe we ought to look at sort of being more restrictive. One pushback you hear is this concept of food deserts, they call them, where communities where there's no healthy food within any reasonable distance. The market would change that in about 2 weeks. If the only thing you were allowed to buy at these stores was nutritious food, then they would stock nutritious food. But people don't necessarily make that as their first choice when they go into some of these stores. They're buying the packaged, death in a box, and so that's what they're stocking. And if you couldn't use your benefit dollars for that, then you'd probably have a greater, allocation of good food in these communities, or not. But we went and met with the people at the USDA about this idea and suggested that they allow a state or two to experiment with it. Just we don't have to all do it the same way in the whole country, but it's actually not legal to do that. So it would actually require Congress to do something sensible all at once, and we know how Congress is kind of the place where ideas go to die. So, but we just think getting back to real food, and Lewis suggested that his standard would be that if his grandmother would recognize it as something edible, then it's probably good. She wouldn't know what Fruit Loops were or anything. She just ate normal, real food. And so that's something that we're going to be advocating for, at least an experiment, because these kids are only eating what their parents buy. And if we can't convince them the easy way, maybe we have to do it the hard way. And it's worth thinking about. The foods that they're eating are terrible. In a lot of cases, we try to keep it really simple with the kids and the families, because if you tell them the 17 guidelines that they're supposed to follow, that's not good. That won't work. So we try to keep it really simple. Get all the refined sugar out of the household. No sweet, Charleston is like the capital of sweet tea. So no sweet tea, no Sprite, no sports drinks, no high fructose corn syrup, none of that stuff. Just get it all out, because these kids are all insulin resistant and leptin resistant, and their metabolisms are wrecked by all of the sugar that they're swallowing all the time. And it doesn't do anything to make them ever feel satiated, because that's just sugar. It's just pure glucose going into your body. And then the second thing is to get rid of all the really pro-inflammatory fats in their diet, all the seed oils, the fried foods. If they can just get all the fried foods out of their diet, that's really going to help with inflammation and pain and just the problems that they have from eating this super pro-inflammatory diet. No one is ever going to get fat from eating lots of rice and broccoli, even if you load it up with butter. But if you put me in front of a plate of French fries, I can eat my body weight in that stuff. And there's a reason. You just never get that signal from your brain that says, oh, you've had enough, put down the fork. But with broccoli, I get that signal when I just look at it. So we try to get these kids to just do these two things right. Just get all the sugar out, and then get all the fried food out of your house. And then if you replace that with healthy choices, you're about 75% of the way there. And that's not perfect. You don't now have a perfect diet, but we've had a lot of luck with keeping it really, really simple. And then once they've had some success and they've bought in, now maybe you can add some refinements. You can start talking about the other foods that they're eating and how to tune it up. But if you don't fix those two big things, getting rid of the fried food and getting rid of all the sugar, then nothing else is going to matter. So you can talk about organic and grass-fed and all that stuff, but that's the last 1%. You can get the big stuff done with just those two changes in your diet. Brandon is the biggest kid we've ever worked with. He was 500 plus pounds. The scale that we had stopped at 500 pounds, so we don't even know how much the plus was, because we didn't have a scale that measured above 500 pounds. We just got one that goes up to 600, so maybe we'll check in with him. The day he turned 18, his mom filed for disability for him. He's never going to work a day in his life. He is going to wear out pretty quickly. But the one thing you know for sure is that we can keep this kid alive. We can keep him pasted together. We'll pay for all of his diabetes medications, and we'll pay for his joint replacement surgeries that will come really early in life, because nobody's body's designed to support 500 pounds. Our medical system is really good at keeping people alive, but it's going to be unbelievably expensive. I mean, Lewis's dad was, in the 500s when he was in his 50s and 60s, and he was an expensive burden. But this kid will never work, never earn a living. He'll be on taxpayer benefits almost his entire life, and he will live shockingly long, but at stunning expense. And it's sad when it's one kid, but it's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And that's what's going to break the healthcare system. You can argue about the shape of healthcare reform, but you can't reform the system if you've got these kids that are going to use $1 million worth of healthcare before they're even 40.